In the crumbling ruins of a once mighty empire, one man stands at the edge of destiny, balancing on the precipice between greatness and catastrophe. His name? Alexios I Komnenos. The Byzantine Empire, on the verge of collapse, needed more than a ruler, it needed a savior. But what if I told you that this emperor's rise to power wasn't just about military prowess or diplomatic skill? What if the survival of an empire hinged on something deeper, something more personal than most could ever imagine? Imagine this: a vast and powerful kingdom, now shattered by invaders, internal corruption, and age-old traditions breaking down. Yet, in the midst of it all, Alexios, a man not born into an obvious inheritance of greatness, found a way to seize control, not through brute force alone, but through a blend of ruthlessness, resilience, and an uncanny ability to see what others could not. His ascent to the throne wasn't the result of a long dynasty or an age-old claim to power. It was a battle of survival, and it started in the most unlikely of places. At the heart of the Byzantine Empire's crumbling fortress stood a man with no grand military army behind him, no stable political alliances, only a web of connections he carefully weaved throughout his early life. From his family's military traditions to his marriage with an influential member of the Anatolian aristocracy. This is the story of a man who would either restore an empire to its former glory or see it fall to the grasp of history's relentless march. What made Alexios's rise to power so extraordinary? It wasn't just his military experience, though it was undeniably significant, or his political acumen, though his skills in navigating the treacherous political waters of the time were unparalleled. It was his ability to adapt, to see the cracks in a fractured empire and make them work to his advantage. It was his uncanny knack for diplomacy in a time when alliances were fragile and trust even more so. And above all, it was his unyielding resolve to protect what remained of a fractured empire at all costs. The emperor's first and foremost task upon seizing the throne? To ensure the survival of his people, the remnants of his empire, against a relentless tide of enemies. The threat that loomed largest? The Norman invasion of the Balkans, a barbarian army led by the fearsome Robert Guiscard. At its core, this was not merely a military conflict. This was a fight for the very soul of the Byzantine Empire, a defining moment that would shape the future of an entire region. What were the stakes? To put it simply, everything. The Balkans, the heart of Byzantine power, was under siege. A huge force, approximately 30,000 strong, including Norman heavy cavalry, Italian infantry, and Saracen archers, had advanced towards the empire, sweeping across territory that had once been the bedrock of Byzantine influence. This was a moment of life or death for the empire. The Byzantines had already been weakened, fragmented by centuries of infighting, corruption, and war. To lose the Balkans would be to lose everything. But Alexios, ever the strategist, did not panic. In fact, he saw an opportunity in this chaos. Instead of falling into despair, he gathered what little was left of the imperial army and crafted a plan that would lead him into a battle that would shape the future of the empire. The siege of Draium, the Norman assault on the fortress of Dyrrhachium, became the battleground for this ancient empire's survival. It wasn't just about soldiers and siege engines. It was about strategy, innovation, and understanding the enemy in ways no one else could. The siege of Draium, the breaking point. The walls of Draium were thick, reinforced by towers and moats carved into solid rock. For months, Norman siege engines launched boulders and fire at the defences. But Alexios was no stranger to difficult odds. With only 20,000 soldiers, half of whom were hastily assembled militia, mercenaries, and a few loyal regiments, he led his troops to the rescue. He knew that this was not just about defeating the enemy, it was about giving the Byzantine people hope. Imagine the scene: the thunder of battle, the screams of soldiers on both sides, the smoke rising from the burning siege engines. Alexios stood at the forefront of this battle, not from behind a shielded command post, but leading his men, rallying them with the courage only a true leader possesses. It wasn't a glorious charge, but a desperate fight for survival. His army, though small, had heart, and it was that heart that allowed them to stand against the ferocity of the Norman advance. The Battle of Draium was a turning point. It wasn't just the bloodshed or the tactical missteps of the enemy that sealed their fate. It was Alexios's ability to use his resources wisely, his ability to rally his forces when all seemed lost. But it was also something else, something intangible. It was the fierce loyalty he inspired, the sense of purpose that surged through the veins of his soldiers. Despite the tactical superiority of Norman cavalry and the overwhelming siege machines, it was Alexios's leadership that ultimately turned the tide. His forces, though outnumbered, fought with the tenacity that only those who have nothing left to lose can. And in the end, it was the very thing that seemed like the Empire's greatest weakness, the lack of a full, trained military that became its greatest strength. The Norman forces were thrown back, their supply lines cut, their morale shattered. The Byzantines, despite all odds, had prevailed. Alexios had saved the Balkans, at least for the moment. The danger had passed, but the war was far from over. But this wasn't just a military victory. It was a political masterstroke. Alexios's rise wasn't built on the backs of generals or the strength of imperial bloodlines. It was built on diplomacy, negotiation, and a deep understanding of the political landscape of Europe. In the aftermath of the Norman invasion, Alexios turned his attention to a different kind of battle, the one for the hearts and minds of Europe. Through a series of diplomatic moves that seemed almost desperate, Alexios reached out to unlikely allies. Venice, the powerful maritime republic, became his partner in a fight for survival. Through the Golden Bull of 1082, Alexios secured Venetian naval support, and in return, he granted them unprecedented commercial privileges across the empire. It was a bold move, one that broke with centuries of tradition, but it was the price of survival. An empire on the brink of collapse had no room for pride. The key lesson? Sometimes, survival is not about winning every battle. It's about knowing when to fight and when to make difficult compromises. Alexios knew this better than anyone. His decisions, though often controversial, were made with the singular goal of securing the Byzantine Empire's future. Before I continue with the rest of the story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll not only support this channel, but also help me continue bringing you more in-depth stories and history. Thank you for being a part of this journey. The future of an empire, diplomacy and survival. As Alexios turned his attention to the rising threat of Turkish expansion in Anatolia, his diplomacy became more refined. The death of Sultan Malik Shah in 1092 shattered the Turkish unity, and Alexios seized the opportunity. He struck deals with individual Turkish emirs, picking them off one by one, while sending emissaries across Europe to secure help. His negotiations with Pope Urban II for Western assistance led to an unexpected consequence: the First Crusade. This wasn't what Alexios had envisioned. He sought a small contingent of 10,000 soldiers, but what he got was the fury of thousands of crusaders, each with their own agenda. But Alexios was a master of turning chaos to his advantage. Despite the uncontrollable nature of the crusade, he managed to secure some of the empire's lost lands in Anatolia, cementing his role as a master of both military and political strategy. Stay tuned as we continue exploring the brilliance and struggles of Alexios I Komnenos, a ruler who defied the odds and changed the course of Byzantine history. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to hear more about this fascinating period of history. As I reflect on the story of Alexios I Komnenos, I can't help but see parallels to the struggles we face in our own lives today. There are moments when we feel as though we're standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure of how to move forward, weighed down by the enormity of our challenges. It's in those moments of vulnerability, when everything seems to be slipping away, that our true strength is tested. Alexios wasn't born into a life of certainty, and neither are many of us. But what made him extraordinary was not his noble birth, or his unshakable position. It was his resilience, his ability to adapt and find opportunities where others saw only obstacles. The Byzantines had already lost so much. The empire had been weakened by decades of instability, both internal and external. The people were divided, their hopes dwindling with each passing day. Yet Alexios rose, not with promises of grandeur, but with the kind of leadership that is grounded in survival. His decisions were not guided by the desire for glory, but by an understanding that survival for both him and his people, came through hard choices. Choices that, at times, required sacrifices of pride and tradition. How often in our own lives do we face moments when survival seems the only option, and every decision feels like it could either save us or doom us? Alexios' story reminds us that the road to resilience is never about avoiding hardship. It's about confronting it head-on, making choices with a clear-eyed understanding of the reality and always holding on to the vision of what could be, not just what is. Sometimes, the strength we need to survive doesn't come from a place of power, but from the quiet resolve to keep moving forward, even when the odds are stacked against us. And that's where Alexios' brilliance truly shone. His ability to pivot, to look at what he had and turn it into a strength. His military might may have been limited, but he used diplomacy, alliances, and sheer tactical genius to outmaneuver his enemies. This is a lesson we can all take to heart, that sometimes the tools we think we need to succeed are not the ones that matter most. What really matters is the ability to adapt, to see opportunities in unexpected places, and to find strength in what others may deem weaknesses. Alexios didn't have the strongest army. He had the most effective one, because he knew how to use it. But it wasn't just about the strategy. There was an emotional intelligence in his leadership. The loyalty he inspired in his men, the trust he built through his actions and his bravery, are what truly set him apart. There's a deep lesson here about how leadership is not simply about command, but about connection. Alexios understood that the hearts and minds of his soldiers mattered more than any weapon in his arsenal. He led not just by strategy, but by example, showing them that the fight was worth it, not because of what they might gain, but because of what they could preserve. The tragedy of life is that we often wait for the perfect conditions to act, for the moment when we feel ready. Alexios' rise to power tells us that the time to act is never perfect, and that waiting for everything to align is a luxury we cannot afford. His empire was on the brink of collapse, and yet, in the midst of chaos, he saw that even in the rubble, there could be a path forward. Sometimes, the moments that seem the darkest hold the potential for the greatest change. The question is, are we willing to take that first step, even when we're unsure of where it will lead? In my own journey, I've found that resilience doesn't come from knowing all the answers. It comes from having the courage to move forward, even when the way seems unclear. It comes from making the tough calls when everything in you screams to retreat. Like Alexios, we must each find a way to transform our challenges into opportunities, to see beyond the immediate struggles and embrace the potential that lies in the future. This, perhaps, is the greatest lesson of all, the power we have to shape our own destinies, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As we continue to explore Alexios' story, let's reflect on this truth, that in every moment of struggle, there is a choice to be made, and that choice, though difficult, can define the future. Will we rise, adapt, and lead, or will we succumb to the weight of our challenges? In the end, it's not the empire we're building that matters most, but the strength we cultivate within ourselves as we face life's greatest tests. In the face of overwhelming adversity, sometimes the fate of entire empires rests on a single decisive battle. For Alexios I Komnenos, that battle was the siege of Draium, an event that would either define the future of the Byzantine Empire or hasten its demise. But what was at stake in this battle was not merely the land, the soldiers, or the fortifications. It was the soul of a kingdom teetering on the edge of collapse, a world that had long since lost its former glory. For Alexios, this moment was personal, not just for the empire he had sworn to protect, but for the future of his own legacy. What was the true cost of survival, and how far was Alexios willing to go to ensure that the Byzantine flame would not be extinguished? In the years leading up to the siege, Alexios had been thrust into a position where failure was not an option. The empire, long in decline, had been plagued by internal corruption, betrayal, and a relentless onslaught from external forces. The Norman invasion led by Robert Guiscard was the latest and most dangerous threat to the empire's fragile existence. The Balkans, once the beating heart of Byzantine power, had been overrun, and now the Norman army, a force of 30,000 strong, including heavy cavalry, Italian infantry, and Saracen archers, was pushing forward toward Constantinople itself. The siege of Draium, a key fortress controlling the vital Via Egnatia, was the first major confrontation of the conflict, and it was here that Alexios would stake his claim, not just for survival, but for the future of the Byzantine people. But it was more than a military operation. It was a desperate gamble. The forces Alexios could muster were far from sufficient, and the odds were stacked against him. His army, hastily assembled from whatever resources remained, surviving theme militias, the imperial tagmata regiments, and foreign mercenaries, numbered only 20,000 men. These were soldiers who had not been trained for battle in the way the Normans had been. Yet Alexios understood something crucial that many of his enemies failed to see. Battle was not just about numbers. It was about leadership, determination, and the will to fight for something greater than oneself. As the siege began, the fortifications of Draium, a fortress built on a rocky promontory overlooking the Adriatic Sea, stood as the last line of defence. The city's double walls, reinforced with towers and a deep moat carved into solid rock, were an imposing barrier. The Norman siege engines, trebuchets, and mobile towers attacked the walls with brutal efficiency, the heavy stones smashing against the Byzantine defences, sending shockwaves through the city. The siege lasted for months, and the pressure on the defenders was immense. Yet, for Alexios, this was not just about defending a fortress. It was about defending the very concept of the Byzantine Empire itself. The walls were more than stone and mortar. They were a symbol of the empire's resilience, a testament to the Byzantine spirit that refused to be broken. In the midst of this chaos, Alexios displayed not only his military genius but his innate ability to inspire those around him. While the battle raged on, the emperor did not retreat to the safety of a command post, away from the horrors of the front line. No, Alexios led from the front, rallying his men with the kind of personal bravery that is the hallmark of a true leader. His actions were a reminder that leadership is not about sitting behind a desk and issuing orders. It is about being there, in the trenches, standing side by side with those who fight for you. For Alexios, there was no option but victory. Failure would mean the collapse of his empire, the destruction of all he had fought for, and the loss of hope for his people. His determination, his unyielding commitment to the survival of the empire, fueled his resolve. His soldiers fought not just for the emperor, but for their homes, their families, their heritage. The weight of this responsibility rested heavily on his shoulders, and he bore it without hesitation. His leadership was more than strategic, it was emotional. It was about making his men believe, despite the overwhelming odds, that they could succeed. In the final moments of the battle, it was Alexios's brilliance as a strategist that turned the tide. While the Normans were technologically superior, with their heavy cavalry and advanced siege techniques, Alexios knew that the key to victory lay not in brute force, but in exploiting the weaknesses of his enemies. He used the terrain to his advantage, drawing the Normans into traps and using his small but determined force to counter the enemy's superior numbers. It was a battle of wits, a chess match played out with human lives, and in the end, it was Alexios who emerged victorious. But the victory at Draium was not just a military one, it was a political triumph. The battle demonstrated Alexios's capacity for strategic thinking, but more importantly, it cemented his reputation as a leader capable of inspiring hope in the face of certain destruction. His ability to rally his forces and turn the tide of the battle earned him the loyalty of his men and the respect of his enemies. It was a victory that allowed him to keep the Norman invaders at bay, but more crucially, it gave him the political leverage he needed to make the alliances that would sustain his rule. The Venetians, whom Alexios had cultivated a relationship with long before the siege, became his crucial ally. Through the Golden Bull of 1082, Alexios secured Venetian naval support, granting the Venetians unprecedented commercial privileges across the empire in return. This victory also marked a turning point in the way Alexios approached diplomacy. In a world where the Byzantine Empire's influence was fading, Alexios understood that survival was not just about military power. It was about forging alliances, making compromises, and knowing when to act and when to step back. The concession to Venice, granting them economic privileges in return for military support, was a bold move, one that went against the traditional Byzantine way of doing things. But in a world on the brink of collapse, Alexios knew that some traditions had to be set aside for the sake of survival. This decision highlights an essential lesson for anyone facing insurmountable challenges. Survival often requires compromise. It's not always about defeating your enemies outright. It's about knowing when to fight and when to make difficult, sometimes unpopular decisions. Alexios wasn't concerned with preserving his pride or adhering to the status quo. He was concerned with the survival of his empire, and he would do whatever it took to ensure its future. In many ways, Alexios's victory at Draium mirrors the struggles we face in our own lives. We are often confronted with seemingly insurmountable obstacles, and it can be tempting to fight against them with everything we have. But as Alexios' story teaches us, sometimes the key to overcoming adversity lies not in sheer force, but in the ability to think strategically, to adapt to changing circumstances, and to find the alliances that will sustain us. Alexios' leadership was not about one heroic act. It was about a series of decisions, each one building upon the other, each one leading the empire towards survival. It's a lesson that transcends history. It's about the choices we make in the face of hardship, the ways in which we choose to respond when the world seems to be against us. What Alexios teaches us is that no victory comes without sacrifice. It's not enough to simply survive the battle. You must be willing to do whatever it takes to secure the future. His story is a powerful reminder that in life, survival is not just about what we hold on to, but about what we are willing to let go of in order to preserve what truly matters. As we continue to reflect on Alexios I Komnenos' remarkable rise and his survival against the relentless tides of history, it's impossible not to draw parallels between his struggles and our own lives. What Alexios faced constant threats from both within and outside his empire was not just a battle for land or power. It was a struggle for purpose, for legacy, and for a future that seemed as fragile as the empire he was attempting to save. The siege of Draium was the ultimate test of Alexios' leadership, but it wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about learning how to navigate moments of chaos and uncertainty. The tactics that Alexios employed, his ability to adapt, and his resolve to fight for something bigger than himself are all qualities we can learn from today. In a world that is constantly changing, full of challenges and obstacles that seem insurmountable, how do we navigate the unknown? One of the most powerful lessons from Alexios' story is his ability to remain calm and make decisions under pressure. His army was vastly outnumbered, and the odds were stacked against him. Yet, he didn't panic. He didn't make rash decisions. Instead, he carefully observed the situation, used the terrain to his advantage, and focused on his troops' morale and their belief in the cause. Alexios understood that leadership is not just about being in charge, it's about showing others that you believe in them. It's about creating an environment where people can rise above their fears and give everything they have because they trust in their leader's vision. In our own lives, we often face moments where it feels like everything is falling apart, whether it's in our personal relationships, careers, or broader societal challenges. We can feel overwhelmed by the weight of it all. But Alexios' example teaches us that it's in those very moments when the pressure is highest that the true test of character emerges. The best leaders are those who can remain composed, gather their resources, and guide others through the storm. It's not about being perfect, but about showing up with integrity and determination, especially when everything seems to be falling apart. Another crucial aspect of Alexios' leadership was his understanding that survival sometimes requires compromise. The Golden Bull of 1082, which secured the Venetian alliance, was a bold step away from the traditional Byzantine approach to diplomacy. Alexios knew that the empire was not in a position to stand on pride alone. It had to adapt to the changing world. By offering the Venetians commercial privileges in exchange for military support, Alexios was not conceding weakness. Rather, he was acknowledging the reality of the situation and making a strategic choice that would ensure the empire's survival. This lesson about knowing when to compromise is one that resonates deeply in today's world. In the face of global challenges, from economic instability to political polarization, we often encounter situations where standing firm on every issue is not the most productive or effective course of action. Sometimes, In order to protect what we value most, we have to be willing to make difficult decisions that involve concessions. This is not about sacrificing our principles, but about understanding that the world is dynamic, and sometimes flexibility is what ensures long-term survival. Alexios also demonstrated an extraordinary ability to inspire hope and unity. Even when the odds seemed impossible, his leadership wasn't just about strategy. It was about building a community of belief, a sense of purpose among his soldiers and citizens. Despite the empire's fragmentation and its history of internal divisions, Alexios managed to rally people to his side. He knew that success in battle wasn't just about defeating the enemy. It was about uniting the people who were fighting for their future. His victory was as much spiritual and emotional as it was military. In our lives, this concept of unity and purpose is essential. In times of uncertainty and difficulty, people are drawn not just to what we offer in terms of material support, but to our vision and our belief in the potential for a better future. Alexios's ability to rally his people, making them believe that the fight was worth it, that there was something greater than just survival, was key to his success. And in a world where division often seems more pronounced than unity, we must remember the power of shared vision and collective action. The fights we face, whether personal, social, or global, are not just about winning them alone. They are about finding the common thread that ties us together and using that unity to propel us forward. Finally, Alexios's story teaches us about resilience. The Byzantine Empire was in disarray, but Alexios's ability to see potential in the midst of ruin allowed him to rebuild, slowly but surely. It wasn't an overnight transformation, it was a series of small decisions, each one aimed at long-term survival. Sometimes, we too face situations where it feels like we've lost everything, whether it's our health, our job, or a sense of direction. But Alexios's perseverance is a reminder that even from the deepest despair, resilience can lead to growth. Small steps can lead to larger victories, and just as Alexios fought for every inch of land, we must fight for every inch of progress in our own lives. In our own journeys, when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges, the story of Alexios I Komnenos serves as a reminder of the power of resilience, strategy, and leadership. Like Alexios, we are often faced with choices that will shape not just our futures, but the future of those around us. His ability to lead with both intellect and heart, to compromise when necessary, and to rally others to a common cause offers lessons we can apply to our own struggles. The legacy of Alexios is not just about military conquest or political maneuvering, it's about the human spirit, about fighting when the odds are against you, and about choosing survival, not just for yourself, but for everyone you are called to lead. The rise of Alexios I Komnenos is not just a tale of one man's triumph over overwhelming odds. It is a saga of transformation, resilience, and masterful diplomacy in an empire on the brink of collapse. By the time Alexios ascended to the throne, the Byzantine Empire was in chaos. Its once mighty institutions had eroded, its territories were shrinking, and its people were losing faith. The spectre of defeat loomed large, and the threat of annihilation was palpable. But Alexios, born into a world of fragmented power and internal strife, refused to surrender. He faced a complex political landscape where survival was not guaranteed by mere strength but by wisdom, strategy, and adaptability. And so, in the face of all that sought to tear the empire apart, Alexios set out to do the impossible: restore Byzantine power, secure its borders, and carve out a future in a world that seemed to be slipping beyond his grasp. His first step was, of course, securing the immediate survival of the Byzantine state. The threat that loomed largest at the time was the Norman invasion of the Balkans. Robert Guiscard, the Norman general and Duke of Apulia, had gathered an army of around 30,000 men, including some of the most feared cavalry in Europe, as well as archers and infantry. They had already begun carving their way across the Balkans, and now they set their sights on the heart of the empire. The siege of Draium was the first major clash of this struggle, and it was here, in this pivotal moment, that Alexios would make his stand not just for the survival of the Byzantine Empire, but for his own future as its ruler. At this stage, the empire was already fractured. It had endured decades of internal strife, political infighting, and economic instability. In the face of these mounting pressures, Alexios understood that his survival depended not just on military strength, but on the ability to rebuild from within. With the Norman forces approaching, it was clear that the Byzantine Empire could no longer afford to rely on the old ways, brute military force, and rigid tradition. Instead, Alexios saw the battle as a chance to reshape the empire's future and solidify his position as its leader. But to do so, he needed more than an army. He needed to unite a fragmented people, ignite their belief in a future worth fighting for, and prove to the world that the Byzantine Empire was still capable of greatness. The siege itself was nothing short of a nightmare for the defenders. The fortifications of Draium, although formidable, were under relentless assault. For months, the Normans unleashed their siege engines, massive trebuchets that hurled stones and fire at the city's walls. Alexios's own forces were far smaller in number, with only 20,000 men at his disposal, many of whom were hastily assembled militia and mercenaries who had never fought alongside each other before. The disparity in strength was staggering, yet Alexios knew that numbers alone would not decide the battle. It was the leadership, strategy, and determination of his forces that would turn the tide. In these dire circumstances, Alexios demonstrated his strategic brilliance, using both his military acumen and his understanding of the Byzantine spirit to rally his forces. But it was not just his tactics on the battlefield that would determine the outcome of Draium, it was his ability to inspire. He led his men not from behind the safety of the palace or a command post, but directly on the battlefield, standing with them shoulder to shoulder, fighting for their survival. His courage and unwavering commitment to the Byzantine cause became a symbol of hope for his soldiers. They were fighting not for an abstract cause or a distant emperor, but for their homes, their families, and their heritage. And in this moment of shared struggle, they found strength that transcended their individual fears. What Alexios understood, perhaps better than anyone, was the power of unity in the face of adversity. It wasn't just about rallying his soldiers for one final battle, it was about instilling in them the belief that victory was still possible. He knew that in this moment, the battle for Draium was as much about the hearts and minds of his men as it was about military tactics. He could not afford to let them falter. Their success would be determined by their belief in the empire's future, a belief that Alexios himself had to embody and transmit to every soldier under his command. In the heat of battle, the Byzantine forces, though outnumbered, fought with a tenacity that caught the Normans off guard. Alexios had turned his smaller, less trained army into a force capable of facing the best soldiers in Europe. He utilized the terrain to his advantage, drawing the Normans into areas where their superior numbers would be less effective. His forces, outmatched in size and strength, fought with the sheer determination that comes from fighting not just for survival, but for everything they held dear. In the end, the Byzantine defenders emerged victorious. But it was not just military prowess that secured their triumph. It was Alexios's ability to inspire his men and unite them in the face of impossible odds. His leadership was not just about commanding troops, it was about rallying an empire that had almost lost its will to survive. The victory at Draium was a turning point in the battle for the soul of the Byzantine Empire. It proved that Alexios was not just a ruler who understood war, he was a ruler who understood the people he was sworn to protect. But the victory at Draium was only the beginning. The political ramifications of this battle were just as significant as its military outcomes. The survival of the empire depended not just on defeating external threats, but on rebuilding the Byzantine state from the ground up. Alexios understood that his empire needed allies, and so he turned to Venice, a rising power with a navy capable of challenging the Norman forces. Through the Golden Bull of 1082, Alexios secured Venetian support in exchange for granting them commercial privileges across the empire. This was a bold move for a ruler who had always been wary of foreign influence, but Alexios knew that the Byzantine Empire could not survive in isolation. Sometimes, survival required making difficult compromises. In this way, Alexios's diplomacy became as crucial as his military tactics. The Byzantine Empire could no longer afford to stand alone, clinging to its old ways. In the face of new threats, Alexios understood that alliances were necessary, even if they required bending the traditional rules of the empire. His relationship with Venice marked a new chapter in Byzantine foreign policy, one that would continue to evolve as the empire faced even greater challenges. What Alexios teaches us is that leadership in times of crisis is about more than just strength or wisdom. It's about knowing when to adapt, when to compromise, and when to fight. His ability to make the hard decisions, to take calculated risks, and to build alliances with those who were once seen as enemies is a lesson that transcends history. In the modern world, where political, social, and economic challenges often seem insurmountable, we can learn from Alexios's example. Sometimes, survival is not about defeating every enemy outright. It's about knowing when to hold firm and when to make alliances that may seem unorthodox, but are necessary for the survival of the greater good. Alexios's victory at Draium was not just about winning a battle, it was about preserving the future of an entire civilization. In the face of overwhelming odds, he demonstrated that leadership is about more than tactics. It's about vision, resilience, and the ability to inspire hope even in the darkest of times. His story is a reminder that in life, as in history, the battles we face are not always won by brute force alone. Sometimes, the greatest victories come from knowing when to fight, when to negotiate, and when to unite those around us for a common cause. In the midst of Alexios I Komnenos' remarkable journey, there is a profound lesson that transcends the history of the Byzantine Empire. While many remember Alexios for his military victories, his leadership at the siege of Draium, and his diplomatic prowess, what truly defines his reign is his unwavering ability to see beyond the immediate struggles and grasp the long-term vision of survival. This vision is not just for a kingdom or an empire, but for the very soul of a civilization that seemed destined for decay. When we look at Alexios's reign, we can draw comparisons to the challenges that we face in our own lives. How often do we feel like we are caught in the middle of an overwhelming battle, surrounded by forces greater than ourselves? Whether it's a personal struggle, a difficult career challenge, or a global crisis, it can feel as though the odds are stacked against us. And in those moments, we may be tempted to lose hope or simply surrender to the overwhelming weight of adversity. Yet, Alexios's story teaches us that sometimes the key to survival lies in our capacity to adapt, to make difficult decisions, and to unite those around us for a common purpose. Much like the Byzantine Empire, which was splintered and ravaged by internal and external forces, we too face moments where our resources seem insufficient and our strength seems to wane. But it is precisely in these moments, when everything seems on the brink of collapse, that we find our true strength. It is in the face of overwhelming challenges that we must tap into the well of resilience within us. Alexios did not have the luxury of waiting for the perfect circumstances. He didn't have an unshakable army or a fleet of allies lining up to support him. He had to make the most of what he had, turning every disadvantage into an opportunity. This is where the lesson of leadership, not as a title but as a responsibility, becomes paramount. Alexios didn't lead from the back, he led from the front. He understood that leadership is not merely about issuing commands, it's about taking the first step, showing up when no one else will, and standing shoulder to shoulder with those who look to you for guidance. There is something profoundly human in this approach, something that speaks to the universal desire for connection, for solidarity, and for hope. In those moments when we feel alone or isolated in our struggles, we must remember that leadership, true leadership, requires us to show up, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. We inspire others not with grand promises or empty words, but with our actions, our presence, and our commitment. One of the most striking aspects of Alexios's approach was his ability to forge alliances where none seemed possible. In a world where enemies and rivals surrounded him on all sides, Alexios understood the necessity of building relationships even with those who were once seen as adversaries. His alliance with Venice, granted through the Golden Bull of 1082, was not a simple concession. It was a calculated risk, a decision to embrace the uncomfortable in order to secure the survival of his empire. Alexios teaches us that sometimes survival is not about fighting every battle or adhering strictly to tradition. It's about knowing when to bend, when to compromise, and when to seek help from unexpected sources. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the understanding that no one, no empire, no individual can stand alone in the face of great adversity. In our own lives, we often face moments where compromise feels like surrender. Yet, Alexios' story reminds us that survival and growth require flexibility. It requires a willingness to adapt to changing circumstances and to make decisions that may feel uncomfortable in the moment but are necessary for our long-term well-being. Whether it's making a difficult decision in our personal lives, forging alliances in business, or finding common ground with those who seem to have opposing views, the lesson is clear. Compromise is not a sign of weakness, but a testament to our strength. Alexios' victory at Draium was not just a military one, it was a triumph of human spirit. It was a victory forged through strategy, resilience, and the unyielding belief that there was more at stake than simply winning a battle. What Alexios understood, and what we too must understand in our own lives, is that success is not defined by the battles we fight, but by the way we approach them. It is defined by the choices we make in the face of adversity, by the values we hold on to when everything else seems to be falling apart, and by our ability to rise again, even when it seems impossible. What makes Alexios' story even more powerful is the way it transcends time. It speaks to the universal experience of facing challenges and making difficult choices. We all encounter moments where the world feels heavy, where the weight of our responsibilities threatens to break us. But in those moments, we must remember that our true strength lies not in avoiding difficulty but in facing it head-on. It lies in our capacity to adapt, to learn, and to grow, just as Alexios did when he transformed his small, fragmented army into a force capable of defeating the greatest military threat to his empire. His story is a reminder that leadership, survival, and success are not about brute force alone. They are about resilience, vision, and the ability to inspire those around us. They are about making tough decisions, forging alliances, and knowing when to fight and when to step back. It's about understanding that the greatest victories often come not from the battles we win, but from the strength we gain through the struggles we endure. Ultimately, Alexios I Komnenos' reign teaches us that survival is not simply about holding on to what we have. It's about knowing when to let go of the old and embrace the new. It's about making sacrifices, taking risks, and adapting to the ever-changing tides of life. In the end, it's not just about what we preserve, but about what we are willing to change in order to ensure the survival of what truly matters. The legacy of Alexios I is not just a tale of empire building. It's a testament to the human spirit's capacity for resilience, adaptability, and hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. In the quiet aftermath of victory, when the dust has settled and the echoes of battle fade, what remains? For Alexios I Komnenos, the answer to this question was not a straightforward one. His victory at the Battle of Draium and his subsequent survival against the relentless tides of adversity may have secured his position as the ruler of the Byzantine Empire, but the real challenge lay in what came next. For Alexios, the task was never simply to win a battle. It was to rebuild a shattered empire from the ground up. His leadership would be defined not by the military victories he achieved, but by the profound changes he would bring to his empire, the difficult decisions he made, and the way he navigated the ever-shifting political landscape of the time. As we reflect on Alexios' rise to power, we must recognize that his journey was not merely about one man's ascent to the throne. It was about the survival of an entire civilization. The Byzantine Empire had long been a shadow of its former self, fractured by internal strife, economic decay, and the relentless pressure of external threats. The Normans, the Turks, and a host of other enemies had already torn apart much of its territory. The remnants of the empire were barely hanging on, and the emperor who would eventually restore its strength had to possess more than military prowess. He needed an understanding of the political forces at play, the ability to inspire loyalty, and the resolve to make difficult compromises when necessary. One of the first lessons Alexios teaches us is that leadership in times of crisis is not about responding to immediate threats with blind aggression, but about understanding the deeper currents of the situation. While many would have fought to hold on to what remained of the empire's former glory, Alexios knew that survival required a shift in mindset. The empire he inherited was not the Byzantine Empire of old, a sprawling dominion that stretched from Italy to Syria. It was a crumbling state surrounded by hostile forces with fragmented authority and dwindling resources. His reign, therefore, required adaptability, an ability to recognize that survival might not come from clinging to the past, but from transforming the empire into something new. The first major test for Alexios came with the invasion of the Normans. Robert Guiscard's army was formidable, 30,000 strong, including heavily armoured cavalry, infantry, and archers. The Norman forces were not just an external threat. They represented the culmination of a series of setbacks for the Byzantine Empire. The Balkans, once a stronghold of Byzantine power, were now under attack, and the capital, Constantinople, was vulnerable. For Alexios, the immediate question was how to survive this onslaught, how to hold on to what little remained. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, Alexios saw an opportunity. The Normans, despite their superior numbers and military technology, had weaknesses, and Alexios, with his sharp mind and understanding of the Byzantine spirit, saw that the key to victory lay not in the size of his army, but in the will of his people. This was a turning point for the Byzantine Empire. Rather than retreating or resigning himself to the inevitable loss, Alexios chose to fight. But the battle was not just about weapons and strategies. It was about the deeper forces that shaped the fate of empires: loyalty, resolve, and the power of belief. Alexios knew that to defeat the Normans, he had to rally the hearts and minds of his people. His army was small, and many of his soldiers were not professional soldiers but hastily assembled militias and mercenaries. Yet, Alexios knew that in such dire circumstances, the true strength of an army is not found in its numbers, but in its unity and determination. By leading from the front, standing with his men in the midst of battle, he showed them that their struggle was not just for survival. It was for their homes, their families, and the future of the empire itself. In the heat of battle, it became clear that Alexios's leadership was not just a matter of strategy, it was a matter of inspiring hope. His soldiers fought not just because they were commanded to, but because they believed in him. In the darkest moments, when the outcome seemed uncertain, Alexios's presence on the battlefield, his unwavering courage, and his unyielding resolve gave his soldiers the strength to keep fighting. And in the end, it was not the superior technology of the Normans that won the day, but the strength of the spirit Alexios had ignited in his forces. The Byzantine army, though outnumbered and outmatched, fought with a ferocity that caught the Normans by surprise. This was the turning point, the moment when the Byzantine Empire, which had seemed on the verge of collapse, began its slow but sure path to recovery. But the victory at Draium was not the end of Alexios's struggles. It was just the beginning. The battle had given him the breathing room he needed, but the real work lay in rebuilding the Byzantine Empire. Alexios knew that military victories, while important, were not enough to ensure the empire's survival. His next task was to restore the internal stability of the empire and secure external alliances that would prevent further invasions and bolster the empire's strength. One of the key decisions Alexios made in the aftermath of the battle was to seek an alliance with the Venetians. The idea of aligning with a foreign power like Venice was not a popular one. The Byzantine Empire had long been proud of its independence and had traditionally been wary of foreign influence. But Alexios understood that survival required flexibility. The Venetians, with their powerful navy, were an invaluable ally in the struggle against the Normans. Through the Golden Bull of 1082, Alexios secured Venetian naval support in exchange for granting the Venetians unprecedented commercial privileges across the empire. This was a bold move, one that went against the traditional Byzantine way of doing things. But Alexios knew that in times of crisis, hard choices had to be made. This decision highlights a central lesson that we can all learn from Alexios. Sometimes, survival requires making difficult compromises. It is easy to hold on to old traditions and resist change, especially when those traditions are part of the identity we've built. But when the world around us is changing, when the stakes are high, we must be willing to adapt. Whether it's in business, personal relationships, or politics, we often face moments when we must choose between holding on to what is comfortable and embracing the unknown in order to move forward. Alexios, in forging this alliance with Venice, did not abandon his principles, but rather adapted them to the realities of the situation. He chose survival over pride, unity over division, and in doing so, he secured the future of his empire. The lesson here is profound. It's not about never compromising. It's about knowing when to compromise. Alexios teaches us that sometimes the hardest decisions, the ones that push us out of our comfort zones, are the ones that ensure our survival and future success. It's easy to hold on to what we know, to resist change, but it takes true leadership to recognize when the world has changed and when it's time to adjust our approach. In addition to his military and diplomatic triumphs, Alexios also proved to be a master of statecraft. The Byzantine Empire, once a sprawling empire with vast territories, had seen much of its power dissipate. Yet Alexios understood that survival was not just about expanding territories, it was about strengthening the core. And so, he began the task of rebuilding the empire's institutions, restoring the credibility of the imperial administration, and reviving the traditions that had made the Byzantine Empire so powerful in its prime. His work was not simply about defense and survival, it was about renewal. What Alexios demonstrates through his actions is that leadership in times of crisis is not just about reacting to immediate threats, it's about looking ahead and building for the future. He faced a Byzantine Empire that was fractured and fragile, yet through his brilliance, he began the process of healing and restoring it. His leadership wasn't just about victories in battle, it was about understanding that the real work of restoration was in the rebuilding of institutions, the securing of alliances, and the nurturing of loyalty and trust. When we look at Alexios I Komnenos' story, we see not just a man who saved an empire, but a man who transformed it. He faced seemingly insurmountable odds and, through his leadership, turned the tide of history. In the face of uncertainty, Alexios showed that leadership requires vision, resilience, and the courage to make tough decisions. His ability to navigate the complexities of his time teaches us that the greatest leaders are not just those who win battles, they are those who can see beyond the immediate struggles and work toward a lasting, sustainable future. Alexios I Komnenos' story is not merely a historical account of one man's battle for survival. It is a vivid reminder of the complexity of leadership during times of profound crisis. His journey offers lessons that resonate deeply with our own lives, especially when faced with challenges that seem insurmountable. In Alexios' decision-making, we can see a profound truth. Leadership is not just about exerting power over others, but about empowering them to believe in something greater than themselves. The Byzantine Empire, teetering on the brink of collapse, required more than just military victories. It needed the restoration of its people's faith in their future. It needed a leader who could navigate not only the external threats, but also the internal decay. A leader who understood that survival was as much about soul and spirit as it was about strength and strategy. One of the most powerful lessons we can learn from Alexios' leadership is his ability to make difficult compromises when necessary. The decision to ally with Venice, for example, was one that many would have considered a betrayal of the empire's long-standing traditions of self-sufficiency. But Alexios knew that survival did not lie in clinging to outdated ideals. It lay in embracing change when it was necessary to secure a better future. This willingness to adapt, to let go of pride and embrace uncomfortable truths, is something that many leaders in history and in our lives have struggled with. How often do we hold on to old ways of thinking or doing things simply because they are familiar, even when they no longer serve us? Alexios teaches us that, while tradition can be valuable, it is not the end-all be-all of leadership. The greatest leaders, in both history and in our personal lives, are those who can identify when it is time to let go of the old to embrace the new. Moreover, Alexios' actions emphasize the importance of perspective during crises. It is easy to focus on immediate threats, to react instinctively and emotionally. But Alexios' true brilliance lay in his ability to maintain a long-term vision, even when faced with the most immediate and pressing challenges. His success was not simply about surviving the siege or defeating the Normans. It was about knowing how to use that victory to build a stronger, more resilient empire. His strategic mind enabled him to see beyond the battle at hand, recognizing the significance of alliances and the necessity of rebuilding the empire's core institutions. He knew that the true work of leadership was not just about winning battles, it was about creating the foundation for future growth, a legacy that would transcend the immediate crisis. In our own lives, we face moments where the struggle feels insurmountable, where the weight of challenges is almost too much to bear. Alexios's story teaches us that the key to overcoming these moments lies not just in fighting harder, but in fighting smarter, by stepping back, reassessing, and asking ourselves what we need to let go of, what we need to rebuild, and what new alliances we must form to ensure our survival. It's about recognizing that even in the most difficult times, there is always an opportunity for growth, for transformation, and for change. Alexios' leadership was not just about military conquest. It was about the quiet, steady work of rebuilding trust, renewing the spirit of the empire, and inspiring others to believe in something greater than themselves. The lesson for us, as individuals, is clear. When we are faced with adversity, it's easy to get caught up in the battle itself. But true leadership, whether in the public sphere or in our personal lives, requires us to look beyond the immediate crisis and focus on the long-term vision. It requires resilience, humility, and the courage to make hard decisions for the greater good. Like Alexios, we must learn to balance the demands of the present with the needs of the future, knowing that our actions today shape the legacy we leave for tomorrow. In the end, Alexios I Komnenos' story is not just one of survival, it is a testament to the transformative power of leadership, vision, and perseverance. It is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is hope, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from force, but from the ability to adapt, to inspire, and to build a future that others can believe in. The final chapter in Alexios I Komnenos' story is one of profound leadership, transformation, and, ultimately, renewal. His reign, marked by a series of strategic victories and difficult compromises, left an indelible mark on the Byzantine Empire, setting the stage for a more resilient state in a world fraught with chaos. As we look deeper into the legacy Alexios left behind, we come to understand that his greatest achievement was not simply surviving one crisis after another, but reshaping the very foundations of the empire, and with it, the very nature of leadership itself. This final phase of his reign, which began in the aftermath of the Battle of Draium and continued through the subsequent years, was not about brute force or even raw political maneuvering. It was about vision, endurance, and the ability to make the impossible seem not only possible, but inevitable. In the early days of Alexios' reign, the Byzantine Empire seemed doomed. The external threats were numerous, the internal turmoil pervasive. It would have been easy for Alexios to fall back on traditional methods, long-established military strategies and diplomacy. But what set him apart from many of his predecessors was his ability to innovate, to adapt, and to recognize that the Byzantine Empire, in its weakened state, could not rely on the same approaches that had once made it a world power. As Alexios stabilized his empire, one of his most significant acts was to bring about institutional reform. The Byzantine state, fractured by centuries of corruption, nepotism, and decay, needed a new vision, one that emphasized not only military power, but the reconstruction of the empire's economic, political, and social fabric. One of the central tenets of Alexios' leadership was his understanding that survival was about more than just military victories. The Byzantine Empire's military capabilities were limited, its resources dwindling, and its power to exert influence across the Mediterranean and beyond had waned. Alexios, however, understood that a successful leader in such a time must build from the ground up. Military alliances, yes, but also the reformation of the internal structure of governance. His policies to strengthen the imperial bureaucracy and revitalize the administrative structure are testament to his foresight. He understood that the empire's future lay not in grand territorial expansions, but in securing the internal strength and unity that could sustain the empire in the face of external pressures. But Alexios' strength as a leader was not only in his institutional reforms, it was in his ability to understand the hearts and minds of his people. His success was as much about uniting the fragmented society of the Byzantine Empire as it was about fighting foreign enemies. He had witnessed firsthand the despair of a population beaten down by years of instability. His efforts to regain the trust of the people, to remind them of their heritage and the glory of the Byzantine past, became a cornerstone of his leadership. The Byzantine people, worn down by constant threats and internal strife, found in Alexios a figure who could not only lead them out of the immediate storm, but give them hope for a future once again defined by strength and purpose. The transformation he initiated within the Byzantine Empire did not come without resistance. There were factions within the court, old aristocratic families, and military commanders who were reluctant to relinquish their power or accept the sweeping reforms Alexios was implementing. Yet, Alexios, with his remarkable political acumen, was able to outmaneuver these factions, making strategic alliances and using diplomacy to win over even his most vocal critics. His ability to balance the old and the new, tradition and innovation, became his trademark. By the time of his death, Alexios had successfully restructured the empire's military, economy, and political systems, laying the foundation for the resurgence of Byzantine power in the coming centuries. At the heart of Alexios's legacy, however, lies a deeper truth about leadership, that true strength does not come from a position of power, but from the ability to endure, to remain steadfast in the face of adversity, and to inspire others to believe in a better future. In the face of mounting threats, Alexios never lost sight of his ultimate goal: to ensure the survival of the Byzantine Empire and to provide his people with a sense of purpose and hope. His leadership was not defined by the battles he won or the territory he reclaimed, but by the lives he touched, the faith he restored, and the institutions he rebuilt. What can we, in the modern world, learn from the leadership of Alexios I Komnenos? His story teaches us that leadership, especially in times of crisis, is not about being infallible or perfect. It's about adaptability, vision, and the courage to make hard decisions. Alexios was faced with an empire in ruins, and he had to make choices that would shape its future. Many of these decisions were not easy. He had to make compromises, especially when it came to alliances. His decision to align with Venice, for example, was a pragmatic one, recognizing that survival sometimes demands sacrifices. It teaches us that there are times when our principles must be balanced with the practical realities of the situation. Sometimes, survival is about knowing when to bend without breaking, when to adjust without losing sight of our core values. Moreover, Alexios's leadership shows us the power of resilience. In his time, empires were built and destroyed by the whims of fortune, and Alexios's rise to power came at a moment when the Byzantine Empire seemed doomed. Yet, he never wavered in his determination to rebuild what had been lost. This speaks to a timeless truth, that success is often not about achieving instant victories, but about enduring the long road, with all its hardships and setbacks. The most successful leaders, whether in business, politics, or personal life, are not those who rise without struggle, but those who persist despite it. Furthermore, Alexios exemplified the importance of inspiring those around him. Leadership is not just about commanding others, it's about motivating them, helping them believe in a shared vision. In his time, the Byzantine Empire was frail, worn down by corruption and external threats. Alexios's victory wasn't just due to his military acumen or his political savvy. It was because he inspired hope in his soldiers, his citizens, and his allies. He gave them something to fight for, something to believe in. His ability to connect with people on an emotional level, to make them feel as though they were a part of something greater, was key to his success. Alexios I Komnenos' story is one of transformation. He took an empire on the brink of collapse, and through vision, resilience, and the courage to make difficult decisions, restored it to a position of strength. His legacy serves as a reminder that leadership at its core is not about power, it is about inspiring hope, making hard choices, and working tirelessly to build a future that others can believe in. In times of adversity, when it seems like all is lost, the true test of leadership is not in the battles won, but in the strength to keep moving forward, even when the path ahead seems unclear. Alexios's life is a testament to the enduring power of leadership that looks beyond immediate challenges and focuses on the long-term renewal and legacy of a people. As we reflect on the life and leadership of Alexios I Komnenos, we find ourselves not just learning about the past, but also gaining invaluable insights that resonate with our present and future. His legacy, as a ruler who pulled his empire back from the brink of destruction, offers us not only a historical perspective, but a set of timeless principles that can guide us in our own lives, whether in moments of personal crisis, leadership challenges, or even in our day-to-day decisions. What strikes me most about Alexios's leadership is his remarkable ability to adapt. In times of severe crisis, when so many would have clung desperately to old methods, Alexios had the wisdom to recognize that survival demanded change. The Byzantine Empire he inherited was no longer the sprawling, powerful entity it once was. It was fractured, its resources stretched thin, and its influence waning. In this state, holding on to the past would have meant failure. But instead of letting the empire crumble under the weight of its past, Alexios saw it as an opportunity for reinvention. His ability to see beyond the current decay and imagine a different future is a lesson that transcends history. It teaches us that sometimes we must let go of the familiar to create something greater. This requires tremendous courage, especially when what's familiar is part of our identity, whether in personal relationships, careers, or organizations. In life, we all face moments when the old ways are no longer working, when we feel trapped in a cycle of failure or stagnation. The temptation is to continue down the same path, hoping that something will change, that the familiar will somehow bring results. But Alexios teaches us that real change often requires a leap of faith. It's not about sticking to what we know, but about being open to transformation, even when it's uncomfortable. Just as Alexios rebuilt the empire, not by clinging to outdated traditions, but by embracing new alliances, methods, and ideas, we too must be willing to rethink our strategies in the face of adversity. We must be willing to ask ourselves, what needs to change for me to thrive? The second lesson I find particularly striking is Alexios's emphasis on unity. Leadership, especially during crises, is not about imposing one's will from the top down. Instead, it's about creating an environment where everyone feels invested in the cause. Alexios didn't just command his army, he inspired them. In the midst of overwhelming odds, when the Byzantine forces were vastly outnumbered and ill-prepared for battle, it wasn't just strategy or technology that won the day. It was the unwavering loyalty and belief in a common purpose. Alexios led from the front, standing with his men, sharing in their struggles, and showing them that their survival was about more than just the immediate fight. It was about their shared future. In our own lives, we often find ourselves in positions of leadership or influence, whether in our families, communities, or workplaces. The key takeaway from Alexios's leadership is the importance of inspiring others, not through authority alone, but through shared commitment and mutual respect. People don't follow leaders because of their titles, they follow because of their vision and ability to connect on a human level. Alexios's ability to make his soldiers feel as though they were fighting for something greater than themselves is a testament to the power of emotional connection in leadership. When we inspire others, we create a sense of unity that can move mountains. This is a lesson we can apply every day. When we lead with empathy, passion, and clarity of purpose, we can motivate those around us to achieve extraordinary things, even in the most challenging of times. Another profound aspect of Alexios's leadership is his capacity for difficult decisions. The alliance he forged with Venice, in particular, stands out as a decision that would have been controversial for many rulers of his time. The Byzantine Empire had always been fiercely independent, and aligning with a foreign power went against centuries of tradition. Yet Alexios knew that survival sometimes requires compromise. He understood that pride and stubbornness could lead to destruction, while flexibility and pragmatism could ensure longevity. His decision to grant the Venetians economic privileges in exchange for their military support was a risky but necessary move. It was a reminder that survival often involves taking risks, making difficult compromises, and putting the greater good above personal or traditional interests. This resonates deeply with us today, as we are often faced with choices that require us to step outside our comfort zones, to make decisions that may not align with our long-held beliefs or strategies. In business, personal relationships, and even in politics, we face moments when we must decide whether to hold firm to tradition or adapt to new realities. Alexios's legacy teaches us that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that provide the path forward. And while compromise may feel uncomfortable or even like a betrayal of one's principles, it can also be the key to achieving long-term success and ensuring that we and those around us survive and thrive. Finally, Alexios's life is a powerful reminder that leadership is not about being perfect. It's about being willing to endure, to persist, and to keep moving forward even when the future seems uncertain. Alexios's rise to power wasn't smooth or easy. He faced internal dissent, external threats, and the ever-present pressure of ensuring the empire's survival. Yet, through it all, he never lost sight of his goal: to restore the Byzantine Empire to a position of strength and stability. His success wasn't in avoiding mistakes or challenges. It was in his ability to learn from them, adapt, and continue pressing forward. In our own lives, we often find ourselves facing obstacles that seem insurmountable, moments where failure feels inevitable. But Alexios shows us that the true measure of leadership and success is not how easily we overcome challenges, but how we respond to them. Are we willing to keep going when the road gets tough? Are we willing to learn from our mistakes, adapt our strategies, and keep working toward a future we believe in? Alexios's persistence in the face of adversity is a lesson that we all can take to heart. Success is not a straight line. It's a series of bumps, twists, and turns. But it's the leaders who keep moving forward, even when things look bleak, who ultimately create legacies that last. When we look at Alexios I Komnenos' story, we see not just a man who saved an empire, but a man who transformed it. His leadership was a catalyst for change, a beacon of hope in a time of despair. Through his vision, resilience, and willingness to make tough decisions, he rebuilt the Byzantine Empire from the ashes. His legacy is a testament to the power of adaptability, unity, and the courage to take bold risks. In our own lives, as we face our own crises and challenges, we too can draw inspiration from Alexios's example. The greatest leaders are not those who avoid failure, but those who rise from it, adapt, and create something greater in the process. In the grand tapestry of history, there are moments when the fate of an entire civilization is shaped by the decisions of one individual, moments when a leader's actions not only influence the immediate course of events, but also set the stage for the future of generations to come. Alexios I Komnenos, a ruler whose name is often remembered in the annals of Byzantine history, was one such individual. His legacy, however, is not just about the political and military victories he achieved, but about the broader vision and transformation he orchestrated in a time when the Byzantine Empire seemed on the brink of collapse. To understand the depth of Alexios's reign, we must first acknowledge the disarray that plagued the Byzantine Empire upon his ascent to the throne. The empire, which had once stood as a beacon of power, wisdom, and culture, had been torn apart by internal strife, corruption, and the relentless pressure of external enemies. The imperial machinery had been corrupted by decades of mismanagement and political infighting, while the empire's external borders were under siege by invaders like the Normans and Turks. In many ways, Alexios inherited an empire that was fractured beyond recognition, a realm struggling not only to survive, but to find a sense of identity in an increasingly hostile world. For Alexios, this was not just a political challenge, it was a personal call to action. His task was not merely to rule, but to rebuild. One of the first steps Alexios took in addressing the empire's crisis was to stabilize its internal structure. He understood that an empire weakened by corruption, mismanagement, and civil discord could not withstand the external pressures bearing down upon it. Thus, one of his most important contributions was his ability to reinvigorate the Byzantine bureaucracy. By restoring the imperial administration, Alexios sought to streamline governance and rebuild trust in the system. His reforms were not just technical, they were a testament to his understanding that the strength of any nation lies in the integrity of its institutions. In the face of overwhelming challenges, Alexios did not retreat to tradition. He embraced reform, recognizing that the Byzantine Empire could no longer survive by clinging to outdated practices. Through his administrative reforms, Alexios laid the groundwork for a more efficient and centralized empire. But his genius as a leader lay not just in his ability to restructure the bureaucracy, but in his understanding that leadership in times of crisis requires more than just organizational changes. It requires the ability to inspire, to foster loyalty, and to rekindle a sense of shared purpose. Alexios understood that the heart of the Byzantine Empire lay not in its palaces or its military might, but in its people. His leadership was not merely about commanding an army or negotiating with foreign powers. It was about winning the hearts and minds of his citizens. At the core of Alexios's leadership was his deep understanding of the human spirit. He knew that, in order to rebuild a broken empire, he had to restore hope to its people. The Byzantine Empire, after all, was not just a collection of cities and territories. It was a civilization built on a rich cultural and intellectual tradition. Alexios's ability to tap into this cultural heritage, to remind his people of their history and their potential, was crucial to his success. By invoking the ideals of the past, he was able to inspire the Byzantine people to rally behind him, to believe in the possibility of renewal. It was not just the promise of military victory or political stability that motivated his people. It was the belief that, under Alexios's leadership, they could reclaim the greatness of the Byzantine Empire. But Alexios's approach to leadership was not without its challenges. His reforms and efforts to stabilize the empire met with resistance, particularly from powerful factions within the court. The Old Guard, consisting of military commanders, aristocratic families, and entrenched interests, was reluctant to relinquish its power. Alexios, however, was a master of diplomacy and strategy. He understood that the success of his reign would depend not on the defeat of his opponents, but on his ability to co-opt them, to build alliances even with those who were once his rivals. In a world where power dynamics were constantly shifting, Alexios knew that survival often required compromise and negotiation. His ability to balance competing interests, to bring together diverse factions under the banner of a united empire, became one of his most remarkable strengths. The diplomacy that Alexios employed during his reign was not just about securing alliances or preventing invasions. It was about forging a new path for the Byzantine Empire in a world that had grown increasingly complex and unpredictable. His alliance with Venice, exemplified by the Golden Bull of 1082, was a prime example of this pragmatic approach to diplomacy. At a time when the empire's traditional military and political strategies seemed ineffective, Alexios recognized the value of foreign alliances. By securing Venetian support, Alexios ensured that the Byzantine Empire would have access to the powerful naval forces of the Venetian Republic, which would prove crucial in fending off future threats. This decision, though controversial at the time, was a pragmatic and forward-thinking one, underscoring Alexios's ability to adapt to the changing geopolitical landscape. In the face of external threats, Alexios's military strategy was equally innovative. The Norman invasion, led by Robert Guiscard, had threatened the very heart of the Byzantine Empire. Yet, Alexios's response was not to meet force with force alone. Instead, he combined military strategy with psychological warfare, rallying his forces and inspiring them to fight not just for their emperor, but for their homeland. The Battle of Draium, though a tactical victory, was also a victory of spirit. Alexios's leadership in this moment became a symbol of resilience, showing that even in the face of overwhelming odds, it was the strength of unity and resolve that would determine the outcome. The events of the Byzantine Empire under Alexios's rule speak to a timeless truth. Leadership in times of crisis is not defined by power or control, but by the ability to inspire trust, foster unity, and make difficult decisions for the greater good. Alexios understood that true leadership requires not only the will to fight, but also the wisdom to know when to compromise, when to negotiate, and when to make personal sacrifices for the future of the state. His story teaches us that leadership is not just about commanding from the front. It's about leading by example, about inspiring others to rise to the occasion and believe in the possibility of change. Alexios's legacy, then, is not just the restoration of the Byzantine Empire, it is the transformation of what it meant to be a leader. Through his reforms, his diplomacy, and his military prowess, Alexios reshaped the destiny of an empire. His leadership was defined not by the victories he achieved, but by the profound changes he brought about in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Today, we can look to Alexios as a model for leadership in times of adversity. A leader who understood that success is not merely about surviving, it's about transforming, adapting, and inspiring others to believe in a better future. Alexios I Komnenos' story stands as a testament to the power of adaptability and vision in leadership. His reign was not simply defined by the victories he won or the territory he regained. Rather, it was his profound understanding of the changing times and the courage to redefine what leadership meant in the face of existential challenges that marks his legacy. What makes Alexios' journey particularly compelling is not just his military strategies or diplomatic maneuvering, but the way he navigated through the crumbling remnants of an empire in disarray, driven by the belief that a better future was still possible, even in the darkest of times. In the modern world, the lessons we can extract from Alexios' story are both timeless and deeply relevant. The challenges he faced as a ruler are mirrored in the struggles many face today, whether in business, politics, or personal life. It's easy to become overwhelmed by immediate crises, to react impulsively and with fear, thinking that survival requires clinging to the past or doubling down on the ways that used to work. Alexios, however, showed us that survival in the face of overwhelming odds requires an open mind, an ability to let go of old paradigms, and the courage to create something entirely new. One of the most significant lessons from Alexios' leadership is the importance of understanding the larger forces at play in a given situation. Too often, leaders and individuals in general focus on the immediate problem, without considering the long-term implications of their decisions. Alexios had to confront not just external threats like the Normans and the Turks, but internal divisions, a fractured society, and an imperial system that was deeply entrenched in corruption. He did not simply react to the moment. He understood that the real challenge lay in the broader systemic issues that had contributed to the empire's decay. Thus, his leadership was not about firefighting, but about creating lasting change that would sustain the empire for future generations. His decision to embark on sweeping reforms within the Byzantine bureaucracy, for instance, was not merely about strengthening the imperial administration. It was about rebuilding trust in the system itself. Alexios recognized that in order to win the hearts and minds of his people, he needed to restore their belief in the very institutions that governed them. In a world where political systems were often corrupt and inefficient, Alexios' commitment to creating a fairer, more effective administration was revolutionary. He understood that a leader must not only command respect but also inspire confidence in the very structures that support the state. What is even more remarkable, though, is the way Alexios treated the people of the Byzantine Empire, which was a far cry from the distance and isolation often associated with imperial rule. His leadership was about connecting with his people, making them feel like they were active participants in the empire's revival. Alexios did not rule from behind the walls of his palace or from the comfort of his advisors' chambers. Instead, he stood shoulder to shoulder with his soldiers on the battlefield, leading not just with strategy, but with a deep sense of responsibility to those who looked to him for guidance. His example showed that the strength of a leader is not measured by the ability to issue orders, but by the ability to inspire loyalty and unity, to make the people feel as though they were fighting not just for the survival of their emperor, but for their own future. As we reflect on Alexios' leadership, it's impossible to ignore the personal sacrifices he made to protect his people. His willingness to compromise, to make difficult decisions that went against the traditional ways of Byzantine rule, speaks volumes about his understanding of leadership as a force for the greater good. One of the most controversial yet significant decisions he made was aligning himself with the Venetians. This alliance, forged through the Golden Bull of 1082, ensured that the Byzantine Empire would have the naval strength needed to fend off future invasions. While the decision was criticized by some as a betrayal of Byzantine independence, Alexios knew that survival sometimes required taking risks, even when those risks seemed to undermine established values. The lesson here is clear. Survival often demands the courage to take unconventional paths, to embrace change, even when it challenges deeply held beliefs. Leadership is not about clinging to tradition for tradition's sake, but about adapting to changing circumstances, in order to ensure the long-term success and survival of a nation or cause. Moreover, Alexios's ability to navigate the complexities of diplomacy further underscores the importance of thinking beyond immediate needs. His diplomacy was not about rigidly sticking to a single vision or strategy. It was about recognizing that alliances are not just about short-term gains, but about securing a future for the empire. He made concessions when necessary, and sought partnerships with those who could help him defend his people and strengthen his empire. In a world where power was often concentrated in the hands of a few, Alexios's willingness to make pragmatic decisions allowed him to transform the Byzantine Empire's relationships with other powers and set the stage for future cooperation. What stands out most in Alexios's story, however, is the power of resilience. In the face of overwhelming odds, Alexios never gave up. Even when the empire seemed to be on the brink of destruction, he maintained his resolve to rebuild it from the ashes. This resilience is a powerful lesson for all of us. Whether we are facing personal challenges or larger societal problems, the ability to keep moving forward, even when the path ahead is unclear, is what separates the leaders who create lasting change from those who falter in the face of adversity. Success is rarely immediate. It is a process that requires determination, patience, and the courage to persevere. In conclusion, the life of Alexios I Komnenos offers a wealth of lessons on leadership, resilience, and adaptability. His ability to navigate the complex political landscape of his time, his commitment to restoring the Byzantine Empire, and his unwavering belief in the potential for renewal are qualities that transcend history. As we face our own challenges, whether in our personal lives, our careers, or in society at large, we can look to Alexios's example and understand that true leadership is not just about power, it's about vision, the ability to make hard decisions, and the strength to inspire others to rise to the occasion. His legacy teaches us that survival in times of crisis is not just about holding on, but about creating a future where others can thrive. The story of Alexios I Komnenos is one of a man who inherited an empire on the brink of collapse, and yet, through his unique vision and unyielding resolve, managed to not only secure its survival, but to bring it to new heights. His reign, marked by internal reforms, military victories, and strategic diplomacy, proves that leadership in times of crisis demands more than just strength or tactical brilliance. It requires a deep understanding of human nature, the ability to inspire those around you, and a willingness to make difficult decisions for the greater good. At the heart of Alexios's success was his ability to understand the shifting dynamics of his time. The Byzantine Empire, once the beacon of civilization, had been worn down by centuries of infighting, corruption, and external pressures. By the time Alexios ascended to the throne, the empire was fractured, its influence in the Mediterranean diminished, and its people disillusioned. The external threats were mounting. The Normans, the Turks, and other hostile forces surrounded the empire, while internal divisions threatened to tear it apart from within. It would have been easy for any ruler to buckle under such immense pressure, but Alexios was not an ordinary ruler. He understood that to rebuild the empire, he first had to rebuild trust, not just trust in the imperial institutions, but trust among the people themselves. One of the most profound lessons we can take from Alexios's reign is his focus on internal reform. The Byzantine bureaucracy, which had once been a model of administrative excellence, had become a shadow of its former self. Corruption, inefficiency, and power struggles had permeated every level of governance. Alexios knew that without restoring faith in the government, no external victory would matter. He set about the task of reasserting control over the administration, streamlining the bureaucracy, and making it more responsive to the needs of the people. But his reforms were not merely technical, they were symbolic. By reinstating order within the empire's institutions, Alexios demonstrated that leadership was about more than just holding power, it was about being a steward of the people's trust. Yet, his reforms alone would not have been enough to secure the empire's future. Alexios also understood that leadership in times of crisis requires more than just institutional changes. It requires the ability to inspire and unite. In a world filled with division and uncertainty, Alexios's ability to rally his people around a shared vision was one of his greatest strengths. The Byzantine Empire was, by this point, fractured not only in terms of geography but in terms of its identity. To many of the people living within its borders, the idea of a powerful Byzantine Empire was a distant memory. Alexios, however, was able to tap into the collective consciousness of his people and reignite a sense of pride in their heritage. He understood that to rebuild, you must first remind people of what they stand for, of the greatness they once knew. In doing so, he helped restore a sense of purpose to his people, which in turn helped restore their faith in their empire and their emperor. Alexios was not only a master of internal reform, he also knew how to navigate the shifting currents of external politics. The Byzantine Empire, in its weakened state, could no longer rely solely on its military might to deter invaders. Alexios understood that survival would require forging alliances with other powers. His relationship with Venice, secured through the Golden Bull of 1082, is a prime example of this. At a time when the Byzantine Empire was in a fragile state, Alexios was willing to make compromises, including granting the Venetians unprecedented commercial privileges in exchange for naval support. This decision was controversial at the time, as it went against centuries of Byzantine tradition, which prized independence and self-sufficiency. However, Alexios recognized that the empire's survival depended on adaptability. Sometimes, to preserve the greater good, leaders must be willing to make difficult decisions, even when those decisions challenge long-held beliefs. In this case, Alexios understood that survival was not about clinging to tradition. It was about securing the future of his people, even if that meant entering into alliances with former rivals. Another key aspect of Alexios's leadership was his ability to balance military strategy with diplomacy. The Norman invasion of the Balkans, led by Robert Guiscard, was a significant threat to the Byzantine Empire. The Normans had a formidable army, and their aim was to destroy the empire once and for all. Alexios, however, did not panic. Instead, he approached the situation with a combination of military strategy and psychological warfare. By rallying his forces, showing them the strength of unity, and leading from the front, he was able to inspire his soldiers to fight with unparalleled determination. Even though the Normans had superior numbers and advanced military technology, it was Alexios's ability to unite his people and instill in them a sense of purpose that won the day. This was a pivotal moment in the empire's history, as it marked the beginning of the Byzantine resurgence, a resurgence driven not by superior force, but by the power of the human spirit. One of the most significant lessons we can learn from Alexios's reign is his ability to understand the complexities of leadership in times of crisis. He understood that leadership is not simply about command. It is about understanding the needs of your people and inspiring them to rise to the occasion. It's about knowing when to act decisively and when to make difficult compromises. It's about recognizing that leadership is not a solitary pursuit. It is about bringing people together, fostering trust, and creating a shared vision for the future. Alexios demonstrated that true leadership lies not in the power to rule, but in the ability to unite, inspire, and create lasting change. In our own lives, we often face moments of crisis or adversity, whether in our personal relationships, our careers, or in the broader world around us. Alexios's example shows us that, while adversity is inevitable, our response to it defines our future. When faced with challenges, we have the opportunity to either retreat into fear or rise to the occasion, drawing strength from those around us and from the values we hold dear. Leadership, at its core, is about finding the courage to lead in the face of uncertainty, to make difficult decisions, and to inspire others to join us on the journey toward a better future. The story of Alexios I Komnenos reminds us that the greatest leaders are not those who seek power for its own sake, but those who understand the responsibility that comes with it. Leadership is about more than just victory. It is about vision, transformation, and the ability to rebuild what has been broken. In Alexios's case, he didn't just rebuild the Byzantine Empire, he reshaped it into something new, something stronger. His legacy is a reminder that, in times of crisis, the true measure of leadership is not in what we overcome, but in what we build in the aftermath. In conclusion, Alexios I Komnenos' leadership stands as a powerful example of how one man's vision, determination, and willingness to make difficult choices can change the course of history. His ability to inspire, adapt, and rebuild in the face of overwhelming odds offers invaluable lessons for leaders across generations. As we face our own challenges, we can look to his example and remember that, in the darkest moments, true leadership is not about fighting to preserve the past, but about creating a future that others can believe in. As we reflect on the legacy of Alexios I Komnenos, it's clear that the greatest lessons we can draw from his leadership are not simply about victory in the battlefield, nor about the strategic alliances he forged. Instead, it is his profound understanding of human nature and the complex intricacies of leadership in times of crisis that resonate with us most deeply. Alexios showed us that leadership in the face of adversity is not just about commanding from the front or making difficult military decisions. It is about the ability to inspire hope, to see the bigger picture, and to shape a future that others can believe in, even when the world seems to be falling apart. In our modern world, where we face a multitude of personal and societal challenges, Alexios's approach is a powerful reminder that the most meaningful leadership stems from our capacity to adapt, compromise, and build strong connections with those around us. It's easy to become fixated on power, on winning at any cost, but Alexios teaches us that true leadership isn't about dominating or proving one's superiority. It's about nurturing unity and fostering an environment where others can rise to their full potential. In the case of Alexios, it was never about just saving an empire. It was about creating a renewed sense of purpose for an entire people, about reigniting the spark of hope in a society that had almost forgotten what it meant to believe in itself. One of the most remarkable aspects of Alexios's leadership was his ability to recognize that survival is not merely about holding on to the past, but about reshaping the future with resilience and innovation. While the Byzantine Empire was weakened by internal strife, corruption, and the pressures of external enemies, Alexios did not cling to nostalgia for a past golden age. Instead, he faced the harsh reality of his empire's decline and determined that survival required not just military action, but also profound reform. In this, there is a clear lesson for each of us. Life does not stop changing, and neither should we. We cannot simply look back at the successes of the past and expect them to solve the problems of today. We must be willing to face the present with courage and clarity, to reshape our approach and adapt to new circumstances in order to build a stronger future. Moreover, Alexios's leadership reminds us of the importance of making difficult decisions that may not be popular at the time, but are necessary for the long-term survival and success of the community. His choice to forge an alliance with Venice, despite its controversial nature, demonstrated that leadership requires the ability to look beyond immediate consequences for the sake of the greater good. How often do we find ourselves hesitant to make hard decisions because we fear the reactions of others, or because we are caught up in the ideals of tradition and the way things have always been done? Alexios teaches us that sometimes survival, growth, and progress require us to make decisions that break with tradition, to step into uncomfortable territory, and to act in ways that may seem unorthodox but are necessary to move forward. In the process of rebuilding the empire, Alexios did not only focus on military victories or external alliances. He understood that true power and sustainability come from within. His efforts to restore faith in the Byzantine system by reforming the bureaucracy and reasserting control over the administration were just as important as his military strategies. In the modern world, we often place so much emphasis on external achievements, on the goals we reach, the recognition we gain, the power we accumulate, that we forget the crucial importance of internal strength. If we do not build and maintain strong foundations within ourselves, our relationships, and our institutions, all of our external achievements are at risk of crumbling. Alexios understood that if the foundations of a nation or an individual are weak, no amount of military strength or external alliances can save them. As leaders, we must also recognize that leadership is not just about making decisions and wielding power. It's about inspiring others to believe in a shared vision and to take ownership of the future we are building together. Alexios knew that the Byzantine people were tired and disillusioned, yet he found a way to reach their hearts, to remind them of their collective heritage, and to rekindle their belief in their potential. His ability to make others believe in him and in their empire's future was at the core of his success. In our own lives, it's easy to get caught up in the idea that leadership means being the one in charge, that it's about telling others what to do. But true leadership is about making others feel empowered, about inspiring them to take ownership of the journey ahead. It's about making them see that the cause is not just your own, but theirs as well. In reflecting on Alexios's leadership, I find it inspiring because he demonstrates that the essence of leadership lies not in being perfect, but in being present. It's about facing the uncertainty of the future with clarity, humility, and courage. Alexios's ability to inspire hope in the face of insurmountable odds is a lesson that can guide us all. In our lives, we all face moments of doubt and difficulty, whether in our careers, our relationships, or our personal struggles. But what we take from Alexios's story is the idea that, no matter the challenge, we can choose to rise above it. We can choose to transform, adapt, and lead ourselves and others into a future that may be uncertain but is worth fighting for. Alexios's reign may have been defined by external challenges, but what truly set him apart as a leader was his internal strength, his ability to unify a fragmented empire, and his capacity to inspire those around him. In the modern world, where many of us face personal or professional crises, Alexios's example teaches us that leadership is not about fighting for power. It's about rebuilding, renewing, and inspiring hope for a brighter future. His legacy offers a timeless lesson. In times of adversity, our greatest strength lies not in clinging to what is familiar, but in embracing what is possible, in forging new paths, and in bringing others along on that journey. In the annals of history, there are few figures whose actions resonate across centuries, whose decisions continue to shape the course of future generations. Alexios I Komnenos, the Byzantine emperor who rose to power during one of the empire's most turbulent periods, is one such figure. His reign, marked by a series of decisive battles, strategic alliances, and profound reforms, was not only about military victories or territorial expansion. It was about the survival of a civilization that seemed on the brink of collapse. The legacy of Alexios I Komnenos, therefore, is not defined merely by his ability to fight wars, but by his visionary leadership that enabled the Byzantine Empire to not just survive, but to rediscover its strength and vitality in the face of overwhelming adversity. When Alexios ascended to the throne, the Byzantine Empire was in a state of disarray. The once mighty empire, which had dominated much of the Mediterranean, was now fragmented and vulnerable. External threats, such as the Norman invasions, the Seljuk Turks, and the growing power of the Crusades, loomed large. Internally, corruption, political instability, and a deeply divided court were eroding the empire's power. In this context, Alexios's leadership was not simply about stepping into a role of power, it was about stepping into the crucible of an empire's rebirth. What he inherited was not a kingdom of glory, but a fractured and weakened state in desperate need of restoration. The first and most crucial task that Alexios faced was stabilizing his empire from within. This was no easy feat. The Byzantine bureaucracy, once a model of efficiency, had become corrupt, inefficient, and riddled with infighting. The emperor knew that before the Byzantine Empire could stand strong against external forces, it needed to restore internal order. Alexios's reforms were far-reaching and transformative. He restructured the imperial administration, rooting out corruption and introducing measures that improved the efficiency and responsiveness of the state. These reforms were not just about streamlining government, they were about restoring the faith of the people in their institutions. In times of crisis, it is not only military victories that matter, it is the strength of the institutions that underpin society. Alexios understood this truth deeply and acted on it with a resolve that would define his reign. However, internal reform alone would not be enough to restore the Byzantine Empire to its former glory. Alexios had inherited a realm that was not just politically fractured but also culturally and militarily weakened. The Byzantine military had long been in decline, and the once dominant Byzantine navy was no match for the rising powers in the Mediterranean. Alexios, however, was not a ruler who relied solely on brute force or the military traditions of the past. He understood that survival in such turbulent times required adaptability and innovation. The Norman invasion, led by Robert Guiscard, was a critical moment in the history of the empire. The Normans, a fierce and disciplined force, posed a significant threat to the very heart of the Byzantine Empire. The Balkans, once the empire's strategic stronghold, were under siege, and Constantinople, the capital, was vulnerable. The immediate question that Alexios had to face was not just how to defend the empire's borders, but how to inspire his people to believe that they could still rise above their challenges. This was the moment where Alexios's ability to inspire loyalty and belief in the future would play a crucial role. It is in moments like this that true leadership emerges, not in the absence of fear, but in the willingness to act despite it. Alexios knew that his military strength was limited, and his forces, though courageous, were outnumbered. Yet he did not allow these odds to dictate his actions. Instead, he relied on his strategic brilliance and his understanding of human nature. He knew that leadership in times of crisis is not about commanding from behind a desk or issuing orders from a distance. It is about standing with your people, leading by example, and showing them that the fight is worth it. Alexios led his forces in battle, standing alongside his soldiers, sharing in their struggles, and inspiring them to fight for something greater than just survival. This act of leading from the front, of showing his soldiers that they were not alone, became a powerful symbol of the Byzantine spirit. The Battle of Draium, though not a battle of large numbers or overwhelming military might, became a turning point in the history of the empire. Alexios's forces, though outnumbered, fought with a determination and unity that caught their enemies by surprise. It was not the military might of the Byzantines that won the day. It was the unity and spirit that Alexios was able to ignite within his soldiers. They were fighting not just for an emperor, but for the survival of their homes, their families, and their heritage. In that moment, Alexios's leadership became more than just a symbol of power. It became a beacon of hope for the future. But even in victory, Alexios knew that the work of restoring the empire was far from over. His military success against the Normans was just the beginning. The empire needed more than just a military leader. It needed a visionary who could navigate the complex political landscape of the time, a leader who could make difficult decisions and forge alliances that would secure the future of the state. This is where Alexios's diplomatic acumen shone through. His decision to ally with Venice, though controversial, was a pragmatic move that ensured the Byzantine Empire would have the naval support it needed to fend off future threats. Through the Golden Bull of 1082, Alexios secured Venetian support in exchange for granting them commercial privileges. This decision was not made lightly. Alexios knew that forging alliances with foreign powers was not without its risks. However, he understood that survival often requires difficult compromises. Sometimes, the strength of a leader is not in their refusal to compromise, but in their ability to recognize when compromise is necessary for the greater good. This lesson in diplomacy is particularly valuable in our own time. In a world where global politics are increasingly defined by shifting alliances and power dynamics, the ability to adapt and build relationships, even with former rivals, is essential. Like Alexios, we must sometimes set aside our pride, our preconceived notions, and our rigid beliefs in order to move forward. Survival, in the face of adversity, often requires the humility to recognize that no one can achieve greatness alone. True leadership is about knowing when to make difficult decisions, when to forge alliances, and when to put the needs of the many above the needs of the few. As Alexios continued his reign, he understood that the survival of the empire required more than just military victories and political maneuvering. It required a cultural renewal, a rekindling of the spirit that had once made the Byzantine Empire a beacon of civilization. His leadership, therefore, it was not just about securing borders or expanding territories. It was about restoring a sense of pride and purpose to a people who had long been disillusioned by years of conflict and decline. Through his reforms, his diplomacy, and his ability to inspire, Alexios breathed new life into the empire. And in doing so, he set the stage for a Byzantine resurgence that would endure for centuries. Alexios I Komnenos' story is one of resilience, innovation, and the profound impact that a single individual can have on the course of history. His ability to face overwhelming adversity, to inspire his people, and to make difficult decisions for the survival of his empire is a lesson that transcends time. His reign teaches us that leadership is not about the victories we achieve, but about the people we inspire, the decisions we make, and the legacy we leave behind. Just as Alexios transformed the Byzantine Empire, we too can transform our own lives and the world around us by leading with vision, humility, and the courage to make the hard choices. In the final analysis, Alexios I Komnenos' legacy serves as a reminder of the enduring power of transformative leadership in the face of overwhelming odds. His reign was not solely defined by victories in battle or territorial gains, but by the ability to instill a renewed sense of purpose and direction within a crumbling empire. What Alexios accomplished transcended the immediate struggles of his time. It was a blueprint for resilience, renewal, and the essential qualities of leadership that are just as relevant today as they were during his reign. The Byzantine Empire, once teetering on the brink of extinction, was not merely saved by Alexios' tactical brilliance or military prowess. It was revitalized by his vision for the future, his ability to adapt to change, and, perhaps most importantly, his deep connection to the people he led. One of the most striking elements of Alexios' leadership was his unwavering commitment to the people of the Byzantine Empire. In times of crisis, it is easy for leaders to become consumed by the immediate pressures of defense and survival. However, Alexios' approach to leadership was never solely about the physical protection of the empire's borders. He understood that true leadership in times of crisis is about restoring hope, rebuilding confidence, and ensuring that the people have a reason to believe in the future. The Byzantine Empire was far from the towering institution it had once been, and its people had been beaten down by years of infighting, instability, and a loss of faith in their government. Alexios knew that without reigniting the spirit of the people, no amount of military might or strategic alliances would bring lasting peace to the empire. To achieve this, Alexios recognized that the task before him was not just political or military, it was deeply emotional. He needed to restore a sense of pride and unity among a fractured populace, to remind them of their shared history, their collective identity, and the greatness of the Byzantine Empire that once was. His ability to connect with the hearts and minds of the people became one of his greatest strengths. Leadership, Alexios knew, is not just about commanding from a position of power, it is about understanding the emotions, the fears, and the aspirations of those you lead. His reign became a testament to the fact that, even in the darkest of times, hope could be found in the simplest of ideas: unity, resilience, and belief in the future. This lesson is profound, especially in today's world. In a time of global uncertainty, political upheaval, and social division, the need for leaders who can unite people under a common cause has never been greater. Whether in politics, business, or even personal relationships, we often face challenges that seem insurmountable. The world is constantly changing, and many of the structures we once relied on are crumbling. But Alexios' story teaches us that in moments of crisis, the greatest strength we can show is our ability to inspire others, to help them believe that they are capable of overcoming obstacles, that they are not alone, and that a better future is always within reach, even when it feels distant. What is remarkable about Alexios' leadership is his recognition that survival requires more than just strength. It requires wisdom, humility, and adaptability. There were many moments during his reign when he was faced with tough choices that went against long-standing traditions, decisions that tested his loyalty to the empire's ideals. His alliance with Venice, for example, was a calculated risk. The idea of collaborating with foreign powers, especially one that had been a rival for so long, was a bold and unconventional move. Yet, Alexios understood that survival sometimes requires compromise. He was willing to put the long-term survival of the empire above the preservation of pride or tradition. And that is a lesson that resonates deeply today. In life, we often encounter situations that challenge us to make difficult decisions, whether in our professional lives, personal relationships, or in our broader societal roles. We are faced with choices that demand compromise. It is easy to hold on to the status quo, to refuse to change or adapt. But Alexios teaches us that the ability to make difficult decisions, to move beyond our comfort zones, and to build relationships even with those who may have once been seen as adversaries can be the difference between survival and failure. Leadership is not about doggedly clinging to old methods. It is about being willing to adjust, to evolve, and to make choices that will ensure a brighter future. Finally, one of the most powerful aspects of Alexios's legacy is his ability to inspire others to take action, to believe in something greater than themselves. This is perhaps the most human aspect of his reign, the ability to lead with empathy, to understand the struggles of his people, and to provide them with the hope and encouragement they needed to rise to the occasion. Alexios didn't just fight for the survival of the empire, he fought for the survival of the people who called it home. He understood that leadership is not about exercising control or authority, it is about uplifting others, empowering them to believe in their own strength, and fostering a collective sense of purpose. His leadership was about creating a shared vision for the future, one that the people could rally behind. In our own lives, we are often called upon to lead in one form or another. Whether in our families, workplaces, or communities, we have the opportunity to influence the lives of others. The story of Alexios I Komnenos teaches us that leadership is not defined by the title we hold or the power we wield. It is defined by our ability to inspire, to uplift, and to create a sense of unity and hope. Even in the face of adversity, it reminds us that our true strength lies not in what we achieve alone, but in how we bring others along with us, in how we lead with integrity, and in how we foster a sense of shared purpose and vision. In conclusion, Alexios's reign was a triumph not only of military and political strategy, but of leadership that transcended the traditional bounds of power. His ability to restore the Byzantine Empire, to bring it back from the brink of collapse, was a result of his vision, his empathy, and his deep understanding of the human spirit. His legacy is a reminder that true leadership is not about the victories we achieve, but about the people we inspire, the decisions we make, and the legacy we leave behind. As we face our own challenges in life, we can look to Alexios's example and remember that leadership is about more than surviving. It's about transforming, adapting, and inspiring others to believe in a better future together.